Dear guests, welcome back. Session number 4 on transition and turbulence will be introduced by the chair of the International Renewable Energy Agency's Global Commission of the Geopolitics of Energy Transformation and former president of Iceland, Olafur Ragnar Grimsson.
Good morning. We have witnessed yesterday and today a very eloquent presentation of how fast the climate is changing and the dramatic consequences of the melting of the ice in the neighborhood of Norway and my country, Iceland. And as Christina Figueres said yesterday, the scary conclusion of most of the analysis is that we only have 10 years or so to turn this around. It is, in fact, a monumental task. And it is understandable that people ask, can it be done? Is it possible? Are all these marches by young people, are they in vain? Are all the declarations by governmental leaders and business leaders, are they in vain? Is the climate summit that will come together at the United Nations headquarters this month also in vain? And indeed, we don't have to go far from Norway and Iceland to realize that something dramatic is happening to the planet. The Arctic sea ice north of my country is melting very fast and causing extreme weather patterns not only in Asia and the Americas, but in fact everywhere in the world. And the Greenland ice sheet, which is the second largest in the world after Antarctica, is melting very fast. If only 20% of the Greenland ice sheet melt, it will lead to a global rise in sea level by 2 meters, which will mean that almost every coastal city in the world will not be able to exist as we know it. But the good news is that we have been seeing, and this has also been mentioned in the discussions here, a great global awakening to this situation. We have seen the marches by young people. We see governmental and business leaders coming forward in a way they have not done before. And through the Arctic Circle assemblies, which I founded a few years ago and come together every year in Iceland next October, where over 2,000 people from 70 countries come together in the largest international gathering on the Arctic to discuss what is happening in our Arctic neighborhood and the consequences for the climate and the world. None of this would have been possible 5 or 10 years ago. But the problem is that we are seeing what I call a vicious circle. We see the huge cities in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, cities that count populations not only in the millions, but in the tens of millions, continuing to use fossil fuel to heat and cool the cities. And as was mentioned by the mayor of Oslo yesterday, we now, in the first time in human history, are in a situation where 2/3 of humankind will live in cities. And in fact, 40 to 50% of the global energy demand is for the heating and the cooling of cities. But unfortunately, there is not really a great attention on that. All the hype is about electric cars. Elon Musk and the Norwegians buying Tesla. But the fact is indeed that unless we transform the way we build our cities and heat and cool our cities, we will lose this campaign completely. And if these great cities, especially in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and of course to some extent in Europe and the United States, continue to use oil and fossil fuel, the ice in our neighborhood will continue to melt. The extreme weather patterns will be more severe, and the Greenland ice sheet and Antarctica will continue to melt. So in fact, my dear friends, it is all about energy. I have often said that the Paris Climate Conference, if it amounted to anything, it was a call to a global, comprehensive, renewable energy transformation. Because unless we do that, we lose. The planet loses. And unfortunately, in all the marches and the campaigns and the meetings and the summits and the political declarations about the climate and the threat we face, there is not a sufficient attention on the energy transformation. How we need to move aggressively away from oil and coal over to solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, and other forms of renewable energy. And of course, as I said, the question is, can it be done? Can it be done in the 10, 15, 20 years that we have at our disposal? And the first part of my answer is to go back to my own country. When I was your age, the young people in the audience, over 80% of Icelandic energy came from imported oil and coal. But now we are the #1 country in the world, probably together with Norway, in terms of 100% of our electricity coming from clean energy resources, hydro and geothermal. 100% of our urban heating system coming from clean energy resources. We have transformed ourselves during my lifetime from being 80% dependent on oil and coal over to being a global leader with 100% clean energy transformation. And it's also fascinating to look at our North Atlantic neighborhood, Norway, Greenland, Iceland, the Faroe Islands, Scotland. All of these countries were 100 years ago among the poorest in Europe. The poorest in Europe. So if anybody had predicted at the beginning of the 20th century that they would become leaders in a global renewable energy transformation, nobody would have believed it. But in fact, all these North Atlantic countries have in common that their clean energy electricity production now ranges from 60 to 100%. But of course, people can say, yeah, sure, you can do it in Iceland and Norway, you have waterfalls, you have warm energy, but can it be done globally? And that is why Norway, Germany, and the United Arab Emirates came together in the beginning of last year and decided to support an effort by IRENA, the new International Renewable Energy Institution, to bring together a commission of global leaders and thinkers, together with a community of experts, to answer the question, is there now taking place in sufficient time a renewable energy transformation leading to fundamental geopolitical changes in the world? Is clean energy, solar, wind, geothermal, hydro, replacing oil and coal sufficiently fast to transform the geopolitical situation, making countries like Saudi Arabia, Russia, some of the oil-producing countries, maybe countries like Norway, who depend a lot on this resource as well, lose their energy position and being replaced by a different form of power structures and a new geopolitical map. And we deliberated for a year. I was privileged to chair that commission. We had a very successful meeting here in Oslo, as well as in Abu Dhabi, in my own country, in Berlin. And in the beginning of this year, we delivered to the Assembly of IRENA, where over 150 states were formally represented, this report. And we call it A New World. Because what we came to conclude, that there was indeed a new world emerging. That was the fundamentally good news. And why was it emerging? Because clean energy had, in fact, in the previous 10 years become cheaper. In business terms, more positive, more promising than the old form of oil and coal. partly due to the extensive clean energy transformation that was taking place in China, making solar panels cheaper. And in fact, what we were looking at was a fundamental transformation of this form. This report, which I encourage you to get, it's not long. I sometimes say you can start at breakfast and you can finish it before lunch. It's a very comprehensive analysis, and you can download it on the IRENA website. It's the most downloaded report from IRENA. And I think Hans Olav also brought the copies, printed copies, that some of you can get at the end of the session. And try to summarize the results. First of all, what we are seeing is what I've called a democratization of energy. And that's very important, because throughout most of my life, energy has been dominated by big companies. Look at the leading energy companies in Norway, or all over the world, the oil companies and even the distribution companies. The energy sector has been dominated by big power. But the renewable energy transformation is democratic in the sense that anyone can do it. Each of you can do it. Each of you can become an energy agent. You can build solar power in your house. You can transform the way you move from one place to another. It empowers, for the first time in history, individuals, families, villages, communities, cities, regions, and ultimately countries to become energy independent. And even more, to become an energy producer. So the excess energy you produce in your own home, you can sell into the grid and compete with a big energy company. And it is such a fundamental transformation of empowering everyone at the grassroots to become their own energy agent. It also, secondly, decentralizes the energy structure, moving away from the big centralized actors, whether they're companies or governments, over to families, communities, and individual regions. But it also transforms the relationship between states. And one of the fundamental conclusions of this report is that China is now becoming a global leader in renewable energy. If I had said that at a conference here in Oslo 10 years ago, everybody would have thought I was either crazy or an agent of China. But now it is a reality. We will soon see electric buses from China driving in Nordic cities. We see the enormous transformation of solar power and wind power. And this will allow China in the 21st century economy to exercise a leadership that nobody would have thought possible. And of course, it will change the relationship of countries with China, meaning, for example, that we in the Nordic countries, as well as African countries and countries everywhere in the world, will seek cooperation with China in order to transform fast into clean energy. And since Vice President Pence was in my country yesterday warning against China in the Arctic, I think he missed this part of the discussion. That unless there is a global clean energy transformation, the Arctic will continue to melt. But the best way to prevent the Arctic from melting is to seek increasing cooperation with Chinese companies in clean energy. I know it's a paradoxical statement, but it actually is true. But we also have actors in other parts of the world. Facebook, Google, Apple, just to name three American-based, globally operating companies, have also become leaders in sending the corporate message that the responsible companies now have to move aggressively into clean energy. Data centers. Everybody using data, whether it's your health information or what you do with your phone and your computer, you want to know what is the carbon footprint of storing this data. And those countries and locations that can provide clean energy data storage centers will win that competition. The only reason why Microsoft based its data centers in Denmark was that Denmark could provide the wind power and through cables get hydropower from Norway when the wind powers were not sufficient, because the condition number one for Microsoft in terms of the replacement, in the placement of the data center, was the access to clean energy. We see in America states like California passing laws recently with very ambitious targets for a comprehensive transformation over to clean energy. We see African Arab countries like Morocco becoming leader in solar energy and planning to send electricity through cables over to the southern part of Europe. And we even see the United Arab Emirates building huge solar power stations and now planning in the next 10 years to build a solar power electricity station in a territory the size of Singapore. Because 40% of the energy requirement of Abu Dhabi is for the air conditioning. Not factories, but the air conditioning. Comes back to my point. This battle will be won or lost in the big cities in the world, in the terms of the heating and the cooling of the cities. And the good news of this report, and the good news of what is happening, is that we can actually do it. And we are, in fact, doing it at a pace which is faster than even the most optimistic person could have predicted 10 years ago. So as young people are filled with fear and are scared, as we have heard on this stage, understandably, about the future of the planet, this report gives a balance to that fear. The optimistic evidence, hard evidence, that we can actually win it, and we are winning it in a way that is democratic, decentralized, and based on what is often called people's power, but not state-dominated transformation. So the answer really is very simple. We can do it. We can do it. Of course, it will transform the world. It will create a new geopolitical structure. But that power structure will, I think, be more positive, more constructive, more leading to the fight against poverty in different parts of the world, and will base our prosperity on a much more solid base than it has in the last 100 years. Because that new world of transformative geopolitical structures, if it succeeds, will not threaten the future of the planet. Thank you.